Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming out for Sustainable Claremont's Dialogue series tonight. We've got a great series of speakers with us tonight from Alta Planning and from Active SGV. Really excited about tonight's presentation. I think we have a lot to learn from our two guests that's applicable for every city, but particularly for a lot of the things that the Claremont community is going through right now. Before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. Sustainable Claremont is going to be having our Earth Action Week at the end of April. And we'll have a number of dialogues, lunchtime dialogues during that week. So we're going to have one for composting, for urban forestry, and for more. So be sure to check into our website or sign up for our newsletter to make sure that you have all of that information for Earth Action Week. It should be a really good one. Also, if you're joining us tonight and you're not on our newsletter, please consider joining. It really helps us keep connected with you all and tell you about events like tonight to make sure that you can come join us on these exciting and I think prudent types of activities that we're doing in the community. Angela is going to drop into the chat box a link to that newsletter just in case you're not on there yet. And then finally, for Earth Action Week, we're going to be planting trees together from our home. So we have this new exciting little program where we're going to be delivering small tree saplings to members of the community. So Angela is going to drop a link into the chat for this too. And if with a small donation, we'll come deliver a nice little tree sapling for you. And we could all, from our homes, plant trees on Earth Day or Arbor Day together. So that's all of the announcements that I had. Before I introduce our speakers, just a note about the process. We will take questions at the end of Wes's and Ryan's presentation. You could type those questions into the chat box and we'll record those on our end and we could ask them of Wes and Ryan. Or if you want to hold off, you can wait until after they're done and you could raise your hand and we'll unmute you to do an interactive live Q&A. Okay, let's get into it. So
real quick, Stuart.
Yeah.
I just wanted to plug the sign in real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we don't track who's logged in here. We respect people's rights to just come and go as they please. So depending on how you logged in, we have no way of getting in touch with you. So this is the second or third, or I don't know, I've lost track, dialogue on a topic that has to do with active transportation in some shape or form. So we are collecting your name and email address if you want to hear about this topic in the future or something that might be closely related. So I'm going to paste in a link and it's just a really quick Google form if you want to hear from us about this topic in the future or follow up, like the link to the video or Wes's slides. Go ahead and log into this little form and let us know that you want to hear from us.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for that, Angela. I skipped over that in my announcement notes. Okay, our two speakers tonight. The first is Wesley Rooneyman. He's the Special Programs Director and co-founder of Active SGV. The group was founded in 2010, and Wes has fostered the group's gradual transition from all volunteer community coalition, that sounds familiar, to a fully staffed organization. He served as their executive director from 2016 to 2018. Professionally, Wesley has over a decade of experience in the nonprofit, public health, and education sectors, with a specific focus on the built environment, sustainability, and healthy communities. All of those things so important for what we're looking at right now in the Claremont community. So we're really happy to have Wes here with us. And joining Wes is Ryan Johnson. He's a planning associate from Alta Planning. Ryan brings a range of skills, including project management, multimodal master planning, transit access studies, safe routes to school program coordination, community outreach, and festival and event production. Ryan lives in LA and he's been in LA without a car since 2008. And so he has firsthand experience on what that experience is like to not have a car in a major metropolitan area. And so that's very informative for his approach to planning. In addition to that, he's certified as a league cycling instructor and by the League of American Bicyclists, and is qualified to teach bicycle safety and skills courses. We're so happy to have the two of you with us. And Wes, I'll throw it to you to give us your presentation.
All right, great. Well, thanks again for inviting us to speak to the group this evening. Let me pull up the slides here. Make sure everyone can see that, and present mode. So we have a lot of slides we'll be sharing this evening, and we're going to run through them quickly. As mentioned, we're happy to provide these if you'd like to take a closer look or like to reuse any of this material. So a little bit about Active San Gabriel Valley. We're based in the central SGV in the city of El Monte, and rebranded a couple of years ago just to really focus on sustainable, equitable, and livable communities and fostering them as much as possible. So a little bit of context before we get into specific streets, design, and approaches to improving streets. Greenhouse gas emissions in California. We've been very effective compared to other states around the country at reducing emissions in every sector except for transportation. If you account for the emissions associated with extracting, refining, and distributing oil, it's actually over 50% of all emissions in California are from the mobility sector, and that continues to increase. Everything else has been declining, but we are still going backwards on transportation. So again, top source of GHGs, and the vast majority of those are from vehicles, passenger vehicles and trucks. And one of the issues that we're facing is SUVs continue to contribute more and more to those growing numbers. A couple of years back, they already comprised the majority of new vehicle sales in California. And as you all can imagine, most vehicles are going to stay on the road at least a decade, which is past that crucial 10-year timeframe we're working against on really reducing our emissions. So how do vehicles stack up to, compared to other modes? I think this illustrates it quite cleanly. Walking and biking is truly zero emission, and public transit is almost as good. So carpooling quite a bit after that, and then as you can see, it goes down with the SUVs, especially the larger ones, emitting a lot of emissions, especially when they're driven alone. So how do we start reducing these emissions? Number one, we have to reduce how much we're driving. The planners will refer to this as vehicle miles traveled, basically how many vehicle miles on average you travel a day. So how do we do that? We start replacing car trips with other trips, transit, walking, biking, etc. Also making it easier for people to get where they need to go. So that means infill housing, putting housing closer to jobs. Electrifying transportation, this is probably where the most emphasis is. We get all the media coverage about, everyone's gonna have an electric vehicle and that's gonna solve all our problems. California Air Resources Board has made it very clear that it is not a cure-all. We cannot just get EV everything and achieve our goals. But it is certainly an approach we need to take. And then improving our vehicle fuel efficiency. We're going to talk about mobility, especially green mobility, and how we can make that easier. So one of the things you've probably seen in the last few years, there's been more and more lightweight electric assist vehicles, whether they're mopeds, scooters, or bikes. However, active transportation is still the greenest, and it's also the healthiest. Tremendous public to integrating walking and biking into one's everyday lifestyle. So when we talk about sustainable, green, and complete streets, what does that mean? In a nutshell, it means we're taking a real big shift from what we did for the past 70 years when we were really just focused on moving cars down streets. We ripped out all our old trolley lines and public transit infrastructure in Southern California, designed everything around moving as many vehicles as possible. And we evaluated streets based on how many cars we could move through an intersection. And that's how we graded them. Complete streets refers to designing streets that accommodate everyone who uses the road, because it's not just people driving cars that are using our streets. So What are some of the things we can do, some of the elements of a more complete street? Crosswalk design is one of the lightest, cheapest, easiest things you can do. The standard line, just the two parallel lines, are what we see for the most part in Southern California and a lot of parts of the US. It's not nearly as high visibility. Here you can see a standard crosswalk versus a continental crosswalk, which is more visible for drivers, and the research shows it improves the yield rate. So drivers more likely to stop for a pedestrian in a continental crosswalk than in a standard one. You can also get creative with crosswalks. This is in the Playhouse District in Pasadena. Artistic crosswalks are a nice way to also incorporate placemaking into a safer pedestrian environment. Another one of the cheap, low-hanging fruit in terms of improving pedestrian safety, pedestrian head start timing. So it's essentially gives you a 3 to 5 second head start to cross the intersection before vehicles can start to cross. A number of cities in the San Gabriel Valley are already using these, including Pasadena and Arcadia have installed quite a few. I believe Claremont already has some as well, but it has a really big impact on reducing the number of collisions between people walking and vehicles, and it costs very little, thousands of dollars, not tens or hundreds of thousands. Lane widths is another really cheap one. We lead with these because it's so often in transportation projects. Oh, we can do something, but it's going to take 5 to 10 years until we line everything up to get something done. But anytime you resurface and restripe a street, you can narrow the lanes and create space for other modes. And I'll talk about some of the additional benefits, but the same amount of space, you can create space for a dedicated bikeway, for example, or maybe a dedicated bus lane. And why do the lane widths matter? Well, the research is very clear that the wider the lanes are, the faster people drive. And so a 12-foot lane is Caltrans standard. That's what we have on our highways. A lot of cities use 12-foot lanes still. You'll see in the suburbs. Some of them are even wider if they don't have edge lines. And on streets where people aren't parking, the lane may effectively look like it's 18 or 20 feet. So people are going to drive faster on those streets versus what the National Association of City Transportation Officials recommends based on the research is a 10-foot standard for a lane width that doesn't see a lot of bus or truck traffic. Micro mobility lanes. So, if you narrow your lanes, and you may recognize the example here too, you don't per se have to get rid of a vehicle lane, but just by reallocating the space, you can create a safe space for people to utilize bikes or scooters or other modes of transportation. And here's an example of a protected bike lane, which is really the gold standard, particularly any street where average vehicle speeds are 35 miles an hour over, or really 30 or over. It would be best to have a protected bike lane on if you want to get a lot more people riding, not just the more fearless and experienced riders. Street trees, another huge benefits, both from reducing urban heat island, but also improving walkability and helping support speed management. So streets with a dense canopy of trees also tend to see lower speed limits. And one of the reasons why is it narrows the field of vision for drivers, which plays a big role in our outcomes in terms of street safety. So vehicles traveling at 40 miles an hour have a much higher likelihood of resulting in a serious or fatal outcome for someone walking if they're struck versus 20. And they're also more likely to get in a collision. So the faster you drive, the narrower you get, more of a tunnel vision. So you can't see, for example, the pedestrians as easily or other people who may be on the road. And the other reason why this makes a big difference too is if you're driving faster, you travel more distance before you can actually recognize what's happening. So the bars in white are the thinking distance. If you're going 40 miles an hour, by the time you recognize that a dog has run into the street in front of your vehicle, 40 feet will have passed. And then by the time you apply the brakes, it'll take another 80 feet until you effectively stop the vehicle. So that's 120 feet. It's quite a distance. If you have that, if you're only traveling 20, it's only a 40 foot. So much more likely to be able to avoid a collision in the first place if you're not driving as fast. So a couple more examples here before I turn it over to my colleague. So this is many of our streets in the suburbs here in the San Gabriel Valley look like this. We have a 4-lane arterial with not really any dedicated infrastructure for other users. And this is the same street with an elevated crosswalk with a safety island in the middle. So you only have to make it across half the street before you can take a break and wait for traffic to yield, because we know, unfortunately, a lot of drivers won't yield to people in crosswalks. And also, there's street trees included here, and the curbs have been extended to shorten the crossing distance a little bit. And that makes a big difference too, because one, it effectively narrows the lane, so drivers are more likely to slow down a bit when they encounter this. Also, the amount of time it's going to take a person to walk across the street is shortened. There's less, they have less exposure to traffic. And in this case, it's actually an elevated crosswalk, which is essentially a large speed bump. So it's physically slowing the vehicles too. There are not a lot of these in Southern California yet. In the Playhouse District in Pasadena, there's one on El Molino. There are a handful of others, but this is a technique to really calm traffic and make sure it's safer for pedestrians to cross. So what are some of the other benefits? I mean, we talked a little bit about physical wellness, huge mental and physical health benefits to adopting a healthy, active lifestyle. Aging in place, we're not going to be able to drive vehicles for our entire lives, most likely. And at some point, we will have to relinquish our ability to drive on our own. So the ability to walk around or bike is a huge asset as we get older, if we don't need to drive all the time. There's huge financial benefits as well. Cost of operating a vehicle is $6,000 or more a year. And air quality, I mean, obviously clear benefits. Quality of life too, improved, that are also associated with the improved health and other outcomes. And economic development. And if people are saving money from not having to own and operate a vehicle all the time, they have more money in their pocket to spend on other things. Also, if you're just commuting in your car quickly through a community, you're less likely to stop. They've done studies on how much someone who bikes or drives or bikes or walks through a downtown district versus someone who drives, how much they spend. And it may be counterintuitive, but actually the people who are biking and walking are spending more money on average. Jobs is a clear one. They tend to produce more jobs. A lot of these small projects to improve walkability and bikeability, they're more hands-on, require more manual labor. All right. So traffic violence is a big reason why we work on this issue. The San Gabriel, this is over just the course of a couple of years, and the number of people of all ages. I mean, it's affecting, children at the age of 1. There's a really sad case of a grandmother pushing a stroller in San Gabriel. Both of them were killed in a crosswalk just in the last few years. So there's a tremendous toll to families and people and friends, colleagues, et cetera, of all the lives lost as a result of our poor outcomes, or our streets that are designed not with the safety of all our road users in mind. And disproportionately, those folks who are getting killed on our streets, vehicles are getting safer, but people outside of vehicles are still extremely vulnerable and comprise almost the majority. And this is even more so among people of color. Oh, excuse me. So Latino and Black Americans are far more likely to be killed while walking, and folks in lower income communities as well. They're less likely to have safe infrastructure, even just the basics like sidewalks, versus high income communities. And there's also been some really revealing studies about drivers are less likely to yield to people of color than they are to white folks who are walking across the street. So show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. In California, we continue to spend less than 1% of all our transportation funding in walking and biking projects, despite the fact that 18% of all of the trips in California are by foot or bike. And an example of this, so right now, the biggest source of funding for transportation projects in California is the California Active Transportation Program. Every 2 years, cities across the state are invited to request funding for pedestrian and bike projects. The yellow bars are the requested funding, and the green is what's available. You can see over the past 6 years, the amount of funding has not been increased, and the amount requested has really skyrocketed. So most recently, last year, over 2.5 billion in requests for only a little over 500 million in available funding. In the San Gabriel Valley, only 6% of proposals were funded, 1 of 15. And a lot of cities honestly have given up over the past couple of cycles just because it's become too difficult. So for an example, in cycle 4, these are all the projects that were submitted. 2 were funded in 2018. That was 10% of projects, 1 in Duarte and 1 in Pomona. And in cycle 5, we just got the results for this one. We had a lot of proposals, only 1, it appears, will be funded for the community of South El Monte. So this region has 2.3 million people living in it. And this is just kind of a microcosm of the problem we have. There's just not enough investment in these types of things. And this is despite the fact that voters overwhelmingly support walkability. We have really high rates of folks, supporting improvements to safe routes to school, especially crosswalks. And cities are still kind of moving forward despite the fact that there isn't enough money. This is an example in Lancaster, city of Lancaster, Antelope Valley. So they had a 9-block, 5-lane road, very high speeds, looked like a lot of streets we see around here. They spent 11 million to renovate it, narrow travel lanes, wider sidewalks, street trees, and supported a lot of new development, commercial space and apartments, created a lot of jobs. Sales tax revenue went up a lot, huge benefits to safety, a ton of investment, and made it to be a really inviting place. And that's one kind of local example of an exurban community. But I'll turn it over to my colleague Ryan now, who will talk a lot more about specific demonstrations and projects in the East San Gabriel Valley.
Thanks, Wes. I think it might be easier if you stop sharing your screen, and then I will. There you go. Put it on my end. Let's see if we can do this seamlessly. Okay, is it good? All right, thanks. Yeah, as Wes mentioned, I'm going to cover some examples around LA County that I personally think that are doing a great job of showing how cities can move forward without waiting for this funding to come in from the state. I think he's got it right on the head where we can't wait around. I mean, sometimes even if you do get the funding, sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7 years to get the project on the ground. And we're really up against the clock if we want to move the needle on climate change. So I thought this is just down the street in Glendora. It's a project that Active SGV has installed for the city that's up for several months, where they put in protected bike lanes and crosswalks and other elements as part of a demonstration. And I'll show some other images later. But I think this slide is just to show that it really just comes down sometimes to a few staff. Often volunteers can get involved. Steve Mateer, who is the city's transportation manager, is in the photo. He's out there helping install the crosswalk. And this took 1 or 2 days to get the whole 2 or 3 block project installed. And it was just for a few $1,000s. I think, Wes, you got a grant to pay for the materials, right? And it wasn't that much. So that was a fun example. Some other things that cities around the country are doing is building in design flexibility for their spaces. So taking existing infrastructure that you have now, such as existing plaza space or a park, or even like a parking garage or parking lot, making sure that you're setting it up for future uses and different types of mobility devices that will come into play that we don't even know about yet. So as we're building new projects and developments, something to keep in mind is preparing for 20, 30 years down the road and what the kids of today are going to be using to get around. We have to think a little open-minded about that. Curb management is another tool that cities are really getting into and thinking about how we manage that space where on the side of a road where buses are pulling over, but also now Uber and Lyft drivers are stopping and idling to pick up customers, drop them off. And as you've probably seen in the Village in Claremont or other downtown busy areas, that curb space gets really congested. And right now it's not properly monetized unless there are parking meters that people have to pay for at all times. It's just an unpriced resource, and so everyone uses it for free. There's no incentive to go park a block away or drop someone off a block away and open up that space. So cities are thinking of ways to price that commodity, but also open up the space for transit, bike share, and other mobility forms of mobility. So getting into a few other demonstration images here, and the idea with quick builds and demonstrations is that we can, again, you get something on the ground quickly to test it out, show people what it looks like, and you can do that quickly without having to wait for funding for permanent infrastructure. This is that Glendora Avenue demo again. Ideally, we would have installed it in a non-pandemic year where people, we could have had a big event and a showcase. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible, but we still wanted to get it installed and let people just casually experience it on their own time. And then there will be follow-up surveys and evaluation done to show how it worked. I'll show a few other examples of complete streets projects. I mean, these are just bringing in all the elements that Wes already mentioned. Protected bike lanes being really important to get a diverse range of people to use them, but also incorporating the green infrastructure and landscaping elements as much as possible, just to get those co-benefits for transportation projects. Another benefit of working in the landscaping piece is that you can actually open up new sources of funding that aren't specific for transportation. So there are urban greening type grants out there that are focused chiefly on capturing stormwater, cleaning up the local environment. But that could also be paired with a transportation grant or an existing project that the city already has planned to make it more beautiful and more user-friendly. These are just images from that same project in El Monte. This is one of my favorite projects in the San Fernando Valley. This is along the Orange Line bus rapid transit corridor where the City of LA Street Services Bureau wanted to think of ways to make it cooler, not only in the environmental sense of cooling the earth, but also just making it cooler for users who are out there on hot summer days. So right now, and you could see this all over the San Gabriel Valley as well. And people are waiting at bus stops in the sun without shade, without a lot of green space around. So this was a study for the entire Orange Line in the western part of the valley. We considered elements like shade structures that would be really cheap to install, trees, obviously. We even considered those misting stations where water is sort of misting out on people when it's really hot. And then of course, having water fountains, which is such a novel concept in the city of Los Angeles and the county, is providing public water stations, which can be, not having water in a hot summer day in Los Angeles County can be dangerous. It's just another example of more of a bike boulevard type treatment near the Orange Line, but also incorporating the landscape elements. I wanted to show a quick video. We'll see if this actually plays. We don't need sound, but I wanted to show how some of these elements look like from the user perspective, which I thought was a great use of animations. This is a project our graphic designers worked on, but it really cool to show, because photos are nice, but to show these new concepts to people, we think using videos, even if it's not an animation, just going out with a GoPro and filming examples that already exist is a great way to show the community what some of these concepts could look like. So obviously this looks like a more pleasant environment than a lot of the streets we travel on in our communities. I didn't mention the cool pavement. So another innovative technique the city of LA is piloting is reflective pavement on some of their projects, which could direct a lot of the heat back up, so it doesn't absorb on the street, and so it cools the immediate environment around. So let's see if I can get back. All right, a few other transit projects. I liked these temporary sort of pilot bus stops that LA is testing out. So this is on Figueroa as part of the MyFig project, and this was an idea to keep buses in their travel lane, not have to pull over. And so where you have frequent bus stops, this is a way to provide level boarding platform, but also it continues the bike lane straight. Then a block away, this is what it looks like as a more permanent condition where they actually constructed the bus stop with the bike lane in between. So I do show this. I think it's an example of where the more temporary design is actually helpful, because as soon as this was installed, there were immediately lots of complaints about folks using wheelchairs and other devices getting to the stop, because as you can see, about 30, 40 feet in the background is the intersection. So most people actually just want to cross straight from that corner to the bus stop, but they now are supposed to go up the block a little bit. Most people aren't doing it. So there's a lot of conflict and people trying to jump the rail. It just gets really hectic out there. And I think if they would have used the temporary pilot situation first to test it out, they would have seen some of these design flaws. I think that shows some of the beauty of that tactical urbanism approach. Here's a project in Venice, which I want to show here because it's focused on the flexibility of the design that I mentioned, where it's in a business district on Lincoln Boulevard, and parking is really important there for the businesses. So they wanted to put a bus only lane. So the compromise was they'll only do it at peak hours. So from, I think, in like 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 in the evenings, the parking will be prohibited. So the buses will actually be able to use the bus at the curbside lane. And then for the rest of the day, it reverts back to on-street parking. So I think that's another example of being flexible, compromising with all stakeholders, and coming up with a solution that at least provides some benefits at some times of the day. All right, I'll wrap up with a few slides here with a project that we just finished with City of Claremont and the 4 other cities in East San Gabriel Valley along Arrow Highway. I know some of you have already seen these, but I just wanted to provide a few examples of how we were looking into the future and how we can incorporate some of these sustainable elements. By no means is this design final here for Bucknell and Arrow. This was just one concept we worked with the city on. So we're showing the curb extensions there to make the crossing shorter for pedestrians, incorporating some of the landscaping. And then in San Dimas, I wanted to show an example of how a short-term improvement on Arrow Highway could add bike lanes. And then in the long term, this would be the ideal vision, is protecting those bike lanes, adding more landscaping, the trees, but also we're working with the city and land use developers over time to add more commercial store frontage where now it's pretty low density and there's lots of strip mall development, office park type stuff. So this was great. I welcome any questions about the plan. Wes was one of our partners on it, and really excited to work with the city of Claremont moving forward to implement this. So yeah, I think with that, we'll get into questions. Any follow-up remarks, Wes? We're good to close out.
No, I think we're good. I would just add that Ryan and I, the first project we ever worked on was almost 10 years ago now, and it was Active SUV's first major project. We did a 5-city regional bike plan with El Monte, South El Monte, Baldwin Park, Monterey Park, and San Gabriel, and it was those cities' first bike plans. So we've been working a lot throughout the region, over a dozen plans now, San Gabriel Valley wide, to try to get cities in our area moving more in this direction. And it's been a long slog. I think a lot of the cities have started from almost zero. But getting physical improvements done is often even much more challenging than getting the plans done. So, but we're happy to take comments, and I think either of us can probably shed a lot more insight on any of these specific issues.
Okay, great. Is it okay if we
Sharing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
Ryan.
sorry, Stuart. I think I saw some comments asking for the slides, so just for everyone's benefit, we'll get these slides out to everybody.
That's great, and we could shoot them to everybody who's signed into this. And Angela sent around the form. So if you'd like the slides, please be sure to sign that form that we have in the chat box. That way we'll capture your email. Are we okay to start with some questions? All right. So again, myself and Angela and some members of the team have a couple of questions, and then if you anyone else who has questions, you can put them into the chat box, or you could raise your hand, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. I know I have like a million questions. There's so much great bits of information in that presentation, but I'll sort of start close to home. So in looking at the presentation that you all gave, there were some really like innovative types of activities, and I think about when we try to advocate for these types of implementations locally, that there's some real like challenges, obviously, to getting this done. We semi-recently talked about doing like street murals and things like that. And so when I saw the crosswalk with the mural embedded in the crosswalk, it sort of flashback of those talks. And one of the responses of the cities that we talked to is that if it's not in the manual on uniform traffic control devices, if it's not, within those parameters, then and some of the things that were in your presentation are not within that manual of uniform traffic control devices, like the artistic crosswalks. So how do you advocate for those things when you're pushing cities to sort of go beyond the by the book approach to crosswalks or street murals or any of the other implementations that you all have? We would like to see that in Claremont and in and around Claremont, but how have you found it to be successful in pursuing or advocating for those types of things? Do you have like a guidebook or something that you think helps you along that way?
Wes, I'll start. I know Maria's on, so she can keep me in check if I speak out of line on the engineering pieces. MUTCD is obviously, that is the big guide that we usually will try to follow. But at the end of the day, cities can ultimately implement changes if they do their own engineering study and they back it up with sound engineering analysis. I mean, it comes down to like the city's willingness to take on the liability. So sometimes cities will try something even if they're not quote allowed, and then ask for forgiveness later. And then while that opens them up to some liability, I think some folks see that the benefits outweigh the costs often. So that's sort of the case with the crosswalks, the artistic crosswalks. There's really been, I've never seen a study that showed that it makes things more dangerous, which is often the claims of folks who are critics of that kind of design. But still, I guess if someone did get hit in that crosswalk, there could be a lawsuit. So I think you just have to be careful and take on that liability. There's also other guidebooks out there. Right? There's the NACTO guide, which is the National Association of City Traffic Officials. So they're sometimes promoting things that aren't in the MUTCD, but it's backed up by big city transportation staff. So I'd say, be careful, but be open to it, and check with multiple engineers, the city and outside, to get advice before pursuing.
And I would just say this is a great plug for MUTCD reform.
Mm-hmm.
in many respects. And this is actually happening right now. There's a call I just saw a call from America Walks, one of the national pedestrian safety organizations, encouraging people to submit letters to the new Secretary of Transportation regarding updating the MUTCD to incorporate, the best available information on safe street design. So, some of the things we're talking about here that haven't been implemented or haven't been adopted by MUTCD may soon be so. And so anyone on the call, check out America Walks. I know super wonky subject, but just plugging in with some of those national level groups that are working on these issues can help a lot. And there's been a sea change, as you know, in the federal administration over the past few months. So there's a window of opportunity here for I think real meaningful reforms to be implemented, as well as for more funding to come down. And that's another thing. There are a number of calls going out for constituents to urge their Congress members and senators to sign on to bills, and they're working on a new surface transportation bill, which historically has overwhelmingly gone towards widening highways and kind of the very car-centric projects. But there's a very strong push to fund a more balanced approach of infrastructure, including ped and bike projects. So I know that's one thing our organization, we recently had a call with Senator Padilla's staff, with Transit, other advocacy groups from around the state. And, so many of the issues that we're facing right now, from the climate issues to worsening air quality to, poor public health outcomes to environmental justice issues, are very closely intertwined with our transportation spending. So I know for at least Senator Padilla's staff, environmental justice is really important to them. Equity is very important to them. So speaking up to support kind of these efforts is really important right now, because there will absolutely be pushback on it, since we've done one thing for decades and decades, and change doesn't come without a fight.
Hey, Wes, I saw Vanita had a comment that was related, I thought, to this point. She was asking about short-term tactical urbanism projects. And I have seen that some city engineering staff are more comfortable testing something that's not necessarily in the MUTCD if it's just for a day or a weekend. And then it's sort of treated more like a construction interruption, right? Like whenever there's street construction happening, the roadway changes for that period of time, and people don't seem to bat an eye, and you sort of accept it. And so I think if you're building something for a few days or a week, testing it out, you can often get by with a little flexibility. So something to keep in mind. Let's see, and then I guess, Stuart, are you going to go through the questions in the chat and read them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry, you're doing such a good job.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there was one that was related to that just came in. We're not really going in chronological here, but just do tactical urbanism demonstrations, do those help ease the concerns with cities about liability? Like, have you seen that in your work? Once you do like a tactical urbanism demonstration, that cities are more open to doing more, like in the long run. It's kind of, it's like an entry point for more.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I could talk a little bit about Glendora again. So I mentioned Wes and his team installed that multi-month long demo that's still up right now, if you all want to go check it out. That came about through an earlier demonstration that we did as part of that Aero Highway study, where we tested out the bike lane for just an evening during the holiday festival a couple years ago. So we called it, roll to the stroll. It was during the holiday stroll, and we did it on one side of the street. We also demonstrated some parklets, and the city council members and the mayor came out and enjoyed it so much that they permitted the city staff to then build it for many months. And now they applied for grant funding to actually build it out permanently, and they're waiting to get that money eventually. Oh, sorry, Wes corrected me. It started coming down yesterday. So you missed your chance, but there's gonna be lots of good photos and videos we can share. But yeah, I thought that was a great example of, testing something for just a day got so much community interest that, previously reluctant council members then supported it because they saw what it could do for the local businesses, especially that parklet that we tested out was full of people in the village eating and drinking all night during the holiday event. And they actually, I heard this week from Stephen Mateer at the city that the council approved, I believe, 7 or 8 parklets to be permanently built. So all that comes from that one-day demo again, which is really great to see. So I'd say, yeah, I think it's makes them feel comfortable about putting something different in the street.
Great. Angela, it looks like you had a question.
Yeah, since you're talking about Glendora, might as well plug it in here real quick. You mentioned that it cost just a few $1,000s to get the materials and, the labor to install those temporary measures in Glendora. But what I'm curious about is what happened before then? Like, what was the planning process like? How far out prior to that installation were plans made for those? And, was there funding required, or, what's that process like if your community is interested in doing some of these low cost demonstration projects, how far out, what's the process like, and where did the grant money come from?
Wes, do you want to take this one?
Well, I can start with the funding. I mean, agree, the city was interested in trying things out. They were writing proposals for the California Active Transportation Program to do first mile, last mile improvements to their new Gold Line station. And of course, well, those unfortunately were not funded, but to strengthen the proposals, they wanted to do more robust community engagement and showcase to people firsthand. They had done the one-day demo before, and that was something that was funded by SCAG with like a mini grant project, but they didn't have the funding to do a longer term demonstration to support their proposals. But the pandemic struck, and the Metro board decided to allow grantees of Metro Open Streets funding. So one of the 626 Golden Streets events that the COG had received funding for Heart of the Foothills to be reused to support pandemic recovery relief, specifically around safety and pedestrian bike active transportation projects. And a lot of the outdoor dining and parklets you're seeing around Claremont, I know, requested and received money to support some of their safer outdoor business installations. Glendora requested money to do a demonstration project on Glendora Avenue. So that's what funded it. And it was a bit more because we didn't, I think we spent $30,000 from the Open Streets grant on Glendora's demonstration. About almost 2/3 of that was for crash heavy duty, like 2,000-pound planters to protect the bike lane, which the city is reusing now for a pedestrian plaza in the downtown. Those are going to be moved and repurposed. Everything else is, most of it was flexible delineator posts and lane tape that was put down for 4 months, and then we're going to peel it up actually tomorrow morning. So that's how that happened in terms of how much back planning was done. Alta did the street plans for it. They did the engineering plans for the demonstration, which spent. So to some degree, it depends on how intricate and how involved of a demonstration you're looking at doing. SCAG has like this kit of parts where if you just want to do a park later, if you just want to try out curb extensions at an intersection, you can request that and they'll let you use it in kind, I believe now, and Ryan may know more, but there's also, they have a contractor who's working with them, and cities can request to do demonstrations, and there should be further opportunities to do smaller scale demos like that. I think for the bigger ones where you're, redesigning multiple blocks of traffic and whatnot. Those, of course, are much more involved. But as Ryan was saying, we do it regularly for construction, and you can evaluate how a street performs with fewer vehicle lanes just during a construction project. See, if the traffic speeds go down, see if, there's a lot more queuing in intersections, that sort of thing. And we have we know advocates in Pasadena who do that regularly, since there's so much construction in downtown Pasadena, and the streets have been flowing quite fine with fewer lanes. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Great. Paul, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes, and sorry for joining late at a meeting until 7:30, so apologies if any of this was covered earlier. Sort of question, an argument, and an offer. The question is there an interest in the part of Claremont city officials to have a bike plan? I think we have, the argument I'd like to make is I think we have really exciting opportunity to stitch together the projects that have already unfolded across the city due to the efforts of Maria and others. The challenge is, we have projects, but not a vision for the whole. So, if you tell a parent, well, look, your child is going to be perfectly safe across 85% of their route to school this morning, that's not going to be a very compelling argument. It needs to be stitched together, right? And so my sense is that we've got the pieces in place and a lot of enthusiasm. We did a survey of Claremont citizens, 500 of them, and 43% report knowing someone personally who was injured on a bicycle in the city of Claremont. And 80% reported that they wish they could bike more. And the main concern is safety. And women are a lot more concerned about safety than men, although that's the primary concern on the part of both groups. And so finally, my offer is, I would do everything within my power at Harvey Mudd College, and I know I'd have a lot of colleagues with me to, especially as things open up, to convene community meetings, to put students on projects and analysis supporting city efforts. So all of this is to say, I wonder if the city, what's the sort of talk at the city level these days about whether we might have movement toward a bike plan in the city of Claremont.
It goes to Maria.
Yeah, we punt to Maria on that.
Sorry, Maria, you you weren't even asked to speak tonight, but if you would,
I'm happy to. There's always, a desire to. We know how effective planning tools are. I mean, we have a complete streets policy that has helped plan so many projects and is helping move forward. But in terms of having a plan developed, we're always looking for funding. Where plans cost tons of money, and so funding those funding sources is super important to start the process. You do need that support from consulting firms and people that they know what they're doing to put those plans together. So yeah, I mean, desire, of course there is. It makes things so much easier. Funding is difficult, and not being, there's some rules or regulations for the funding that doesn't help. I mean, we're not a disadvantaged community, and oftentimes many of these grants, that's one of the requirements and gives you a lot of points for being a disadvantaged community. So we've looked in the past, and like I think it was Wes that was saying, we've gotten a bit discouraged just because when we look for grants and we run, we do a screening of the grants and the number of points that we get, we see that we're not going to be competitive just because of the disadvantaged community like heavily component that goes towards other communities.
Yeah, if you notice from those slides I shared, all the communities that have been awarded the last 2 cycles are quote unquote disadvantaged communities. so is Pomona, Duarte, South El Monte. So there's a focus on really investing funds in the most pollution burdened communities, which, organizationally we absolutely endorse, but even the majority of those aren't getting funded. I mean, one of the projects that Ryan shared, that protected bikeway in El Monte, the Parkway Drive project, which goes right to a school, scored a 96 out of 100, and it is not being funded. And it's in one of the most disadvantaged communities in California. So the problem is there's nowhere near enough money. We spend more money on one freeway over or interchange project than we do on all the pedestrian and bike projects in California over 2 years. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So if we decide to shift those priorities and spend more of that money on active transportation, then there are tons of communities like Claremont, Pasadena, South Pasadena, we know too, is in the same boat as Claremont. They never get these funds. They've been wanting to do an updated active transportation plan for 5+ years. They've applied almost every opportunity and hasn't been funded. So it is a challenge. Ryan is not cheap. I can attest to that. So we, at the end of the day, it needs to be a bigger priority. We need to put our money where our values are, and right now that's not the case.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Wes's point. Something Maria and I actually talked about when we were working on the Aero Highway project. The plan was possibly coordinating with neighboring communities. So obviously Pomona is not as well off as a city as Claremont. And so there could be an opportunity to partner with the neighboring cities for a joint application. So that's something we're going to explore, and we're going to help Maria with to see which grant opportunities that makes sense to pursue. Again, I think statewide programs at this point are very discouraging, but SCAG does have a slightly less competitive grant program for planning projects and design. And they're probably more excited to fund like multi-city applications. So I think keep that on at the back of mind. They're working with Pomona, Laverne, some kind of like East San Gabriel Valley regional planning process could be quite fruitful.
Okay, thanks for those answers. That was really helpful to kind of set context there. We're at 8 o'clock. This is normally when we wrap up. We're going to see if we can't squeeze in 1 or 2 more questions really quickly. We've got a couple that have already come in that we haven't had a chance to ask. So let me just run through 1 or 2 of those. So Carl Weltley asked, do you think that cities will allow temporary outdoor restaurants in street parking areas to remain, or those restaurants might inspire cities to allow more curbside restaurants to be located in street parking areas? Is this something that is on your radar and that you're thinking about and are seeing movement on, or what's sort of the status on that?
I can pop in quickly, Wes, unless you want to go, but I'm hearing from cities that they're trying to make it permanent as much as possible, or at least make the permitting process for those easier, more streamlined. So where I live in Eagle Rock in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles over the past several months has been putting in more semi-permanent barriers around those street dining facilities, and it's sort of like making it seem more permanent. So I feel like it's going to be harder to take it away from the community once you start doing that. And like Wes said, in Pasadena, like in a construction project, the world doesn't end, the street still functions fine. So I think we're seeing the same thing with some of the COVID related temporary installations. The streets are moving quickly enough, there's enough parking. So hopefully that convinces cities to keep them in place. I can't speak to the Claremont installations, which are really nice in the village.
Yeah, I would just say too that there's actually been a bill proposed at the state level this session to make it easier for cities to make those temporary installations permanent. AB 773, I dropped some information in it about the chat. So that's an opportunity. I know Active SUV has formally endorsed that bill, but that's an opportunity for you just speak to Assemblymember Holden and encourage him to support that, and your state senator as well, to make things a bit easier. But we're seeing it, a lot of interest in communities that have done it so far to continue. And we're hopeful because I think it has been a real learning opportunity to showcase how we can reuse some of all that space we've allocated for vehicle storage, for purposes that enhance the quality of life and increase economic vitality of downtowns.
Okay, great. And why don't we finish up with one last question? We have a couple more questions that we might send to you all via text or an email after this, to if that's possible, Wes and Ryan, and we could shoot those answers back to participants who didn't get a chance to ask them live. But one last question for you. Are there things that we as advocates of complete streets should be doing or could be doing to make it easier for our cities to implement safer, more equitable street designs? Just as residents, what else can we be doing to help this process along?
Run for office and win. I think that's one of the most effective things you can do. And if you can't, supporting candidates who really understand this issue, or educating them to make sure they do, and helping them become local decision makers, because too often these, whether a city moves in this direction or not depends on if city council is supportive, ideally, and if not, at least indifferent to it, and will let city staff advance projects and demonstrations. You're very fortunate in Claremont to have excellent city staff who is really working on making these improvements. That's not the case in every city. In some cities, this staff can be a major obstacle, and the council may be supportive, but the staff is stopping projects, stopping complete streets improvements from happening. So, but the local elected officials carry a lot of influence over the design of our streets. So I'll make a plug for that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ryan. Sorry, I don't know if you unmuted yourself. You good?
No, Wes nailed it. I think, yeah, politics is the name of the game still.
Right. Okay, well, thank you all.
Stuart, just because you said that, I'm gonna jump in just one time.
Sure.
Wes, you made the statement. It's difficult to get into some of the cities, and I'm a retired public works director. The plans that are coming in, even today, and I've been retired now 20 years, even the plans that are coming in today are still the standard plan that was around in 1950, 1955. So if you're going to work on somebody, you need to work on the architects that are designing, the engineers that are putting the projects together, and the city staff. They're going to do what they have to do. They're going to have to, whatever the council sends down, they're there to set the policy. Staff is there to do the job. But I was sort of cut from a different cloth. I usually took the money. When we went in and did a street, I'm from Laverne. And when we went in and did a street, we always added in the most up-to-date quality of the street that we could. And I'm a big pusher. I love those. I was really looking at those crosswalks that you got there. They were great, and I really like them. I'd widen them out a little bit more, but that's me. But it's going to be an uphill fight, but it's come a long way. I can remember the days you were talking about Maria. I can remember when Maria was over there with us in Laverne. And Maria can tell you the streets that are over there. My biggest push before I left, I wanted to make sure every street had a sidewalk, and every return had a handicap ramp. Now that's 20 years ago, and there isn't a corner in town that doesn't have a handicap ramp, because I really believe in that. Just like I believe in good crosswalks, good signage. I was really proud of the fact there's a path in North Claremont that my wife walks every day, and there's signs up there now. She brought a picture back, And there's an Eagle Scout in Claremont that put it together. And he's got a sign as you go down the path, and the sign is about 18 by 24, and it identifies the street that's coming up as you go down the path. And he's got them all the way down that street. Maria is probably aware of that, but I thought that was the neatest thing. So that's what you have coming ahead. You have a lot of young men and women that are out there that are just frothing at the bit, wanting to do something better. And that's what's going to be the uphill fight for both you and Ryan. I really appreciate, I wanted to watch this. I've been waiting for this to come on. And because I am interested in it. I was one of those weird public works directors. You know, when they think of public works director, you think of concrete blacktop. I was the only one that would not remove a tree in Claremont. I mean, in Laverne, I would not remove a tree. We had sewers going under them. I'd protect the sewer before I'd take out the tree. And I just believe in that. So again, you have an uphill fight. I appreciate what you guys do, but sort of like in the water field, sometimes you got to add a little assessment, and no one likes that word. But you know, if there's a new business coming in town, part of that assessment should be going to the correction of the streets and the traffic patterns that are out there. And I used to take money all the time out of the public works section on line items and remove it and be able to put in those handicap ramps. And so you're going to have the same fight to get everything that you want in traffic control. And you get your traffic engineers. There's a lot of them out there that are still, their mindset is still 1965. And so you got to deal with that. And those are the guys you got to work on to change. And every time I get around them, as Richard can tell you, I am not bashful. I will tell them what I think. So hang in there, keep up the good work. And I'm just glad that I got to be on here tonight. Thank you.
I couldn't think of a better way to close out with that. So yeah, so Wes and Maria for coming, and Ryan, and everyone who came out tonight. This is such an important topic, and you know, how we proceed on these types of issues really shapes the community that we live in for generations to come. And so anytime we have the opportunity to explore ways to, you know, improve the placemaking efforts for safety, for community, for livability, for the climate, then we've got to really hop on those opportunities. So thank you all so much for coming. We'll send a video of this to everybody who came tonight, and we hope that you'll join us at our next upcoming dialogues. Have a great night, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Good night.
Maria, good seeing you.